But today we're going to be talking about what impact looks like. And now we're joined by Richard Joyner, president of Camp Grace Canada, whose journey to begin Camp Grace started early in 2020 when he and his wife decided to go on a family vacation. So welcome to the show, Richard. We're so grateful you're here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's start there. Okay, so this all started with a family vacation to some degree.
Yep.
So can you share a little bit about how that happened? What was the vision and purpose? What was the dream that you got on that vacation?
So basically, we did a trip down to Florida, but it wasn't your typical trip. We weren't going to Disney World. We almost felt like it was almost like a pilgrimage. We would, on our way down to Florida, we were doing a lot of church hopping. We visited the Ark Encounter in Kentucky and the Creation Museum. And even when we were in Florida, we went to a place called Holy Land Experience, which is basically like a theme park for Jesus.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But on our way down, specifically on a Wednesday, we stopped in a city called Macon. And the best way to describe Macon is to Atlanta what Oshawa is to Toronto. So a smaller city, just out of the big city, lots of crime, lots of drugs, lots of poverty, and lots of issues. Anyway, we fell in love with the city. We really felt like there was a need there. And as we continued our trip down to Florida and even coming home, we felt a strong calling back to Macon. So after that, my wife and I were back home in Canada, and we just couldn't shake this calling to go back down to Macon. And we felt like God was calling us to open up a camp, and originally thought we were going to be helping the people of Macon down in Georgia.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we bought a motorhome, and we weren't 100% sure on Macon specifically, but we knew in Georgia. So we decided to start traveling around. We literally went from Tennessee down to Florida, Alabama to the Atlantic, and everything in between for 2 weeks, bouncing around all over the place, trying to figure out where God was calling us.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the 2 weeks, we were starting to make our way back home. We were in North Georgia. We stayed at a trailer park, Lake Alatoona, I believe is what it's called. And my wife was talking to a little girl that was staying in a trailer next to ours. And she explained to her that, hey, we want to open up a camp to help underprivileged kids and all this other stuff. And the little girl said, well, have you ever heard of Camp Grace? And we were like, no. And my wife looked them up on the Google and was like, oh my goodness, look at this camp. They're already doing everything that we want to do.
Right.
So my wife tells me, she says, call them. And I said, okay. So I called them and I said, hey, my name's Richard. I'm from Canada. And, we'd like to get involved with your camp and see how we can help. We didn't get a phone call back. So my wife said, okay, let's give it 2 days. Call them back in 2 days. And if we don't hear anything, we know this isn't where God's calling us, so we're going to go back home. So 2 days later, I called and I said, hey, my name's Richard. You probably think I'm crazy, but I'm from Canada and I want to get involved with your camp and all of that. And then about half an hour later, I get a phone call from the COO from the camp, Lucas Farmer. And the first words out of his mouth were, Richard, you're not crazy. God does crazy things. Why don't you come down and check out our camp?
Wow.
So we drove 3.5 hours back down south into a little city called Roberta. And there they've got about 400 acres of property, all these beautiful facilities. And every building there has a story. Everything's donated. And I found out that the camps had over 17,000 kids come through their camp, all underserved kids, and all at very low cost. So to the families, and the way that they ran their camp. So we just fell in love with the place.
Yeah.
So we started volunteering our time there.
Okay.
And then so over the years, we'd been volunteering, going there for a week at a time, 2 weeks at a time, whatever it was. And then in the summer of 23, before we headed out, God spoke to me and he said that I needed to tithe my time down there. And I thought that was a weird thing because generally we think that we're going to tithe our money or we're going to tithe, whatever it is. But time is such a valuable asset that we have. So we spent about 5.5 weeks down there. While we were down there, Pastor Dave, who's the founder of Camp Grace down there, invited us down to Destin Beach in Florida.
Okay.
He had parked his fifth wheel right on the beach there, and I brought my family down. We were spending some time on the water, just off on the beach there, and God spoke to me, and I looked over at Pastor Dave and I said, "What do you think about Camp Grace Canada?" He goes, "I love it." And I said, "Well, what about you giving me all of your branding, all of your material and everything?" Because I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
And he said, "I absolutely love it." Well, I found out later that day that the place that God spoke to me and asked me to ask him was the exact same spot where he got the original vision for Camp Grace.
Wow.
So
how God works.
yeah, it's so incredible. So a year later, in August of 24,
Yeah.
we held our first Camp Grace Canada.
Wow.
Camp Grace Canada was held out in Prince Edward County.
Okay.
We rented a facility because obviously we're just getting going. We had just over 50 kids register for camp. 31 of those kids gave their lives to Christ for the first time.
Amazing. Wow.
10 kids made a recommitment to Christ. And, you know, we just got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that. This is geared more towards kids who maybe are underprivileged, inner city kids. How do you get connected to that? How does that work? How do kids get funded to go to the camp?
Yeah, so funding is a big deal. So we decided that with Camp Grace here in Canada, we wanted to make sure that there is absolutely zero cost to the families. So we do all of the fundraising ourselves. It costs $700 per kid to go to camp for the week, and the camp is a 5-star experience for the kids. This year, we're renting Joy Bible Camp up in Bancroft, and at that facility, we're going to have things like tubing for kids. We're going to have archery. We're going to have fishing. They're going to take the kids out on pontoon boats, all sorts, low ropes courses, lots of stuff for the kids to do. Amazing meals. We do family-style meals where the kids sit around a table and the counselors actually serve each child. But the way the kids get to camp is we use ministry partners. And what a ministry partner is like a church or an organization that works directly with the kids throughout the year. And we're a tool for that ministry partner. The way the ministry partners work is they are running different like after school programs or Sunday school programs or whatever it is. And they're actually dealing with these underserved kids on a continuous basis. Because what we feel is that when the kids come to camp, we don't want it to be a flash in the pan.
Right.
We really want to make sure that when they have their encounter with God and they have their experience, that there's follow through throughout the year.
Okay.
So it's so the only way you can get to camp is through a ministry partner. And what we end up being is a tool for ministry partners and for churches. An example of this is there was a girl that came last summer. Her name is Vanessa. She was, I think, 8 or 9 years old. Well, anyway, she came to camp through one of our ministry partners, had a crazy encounter with God, had a beautiful experience. Well, the following Sunday after camp, she was at my church. And I was like, wow, you're here. And I went and I talked to her mom, and her mom said it was the first time in 25 years that she had stepped foot in a church.
Amazing.
And the reason she came to church was because her kid said, we have to go to church. So, you know, we're a tool in the way that we can help ministries grow. We can help the body grow. And then, you know, when kids come to camp, after camp, they say to their friends, hey, I just had this amazing experience at camp. And their friends say, well, how do I get to camp? Well, you got to come and join our ministry. You got to come and go to our church. You got to get involved in the body in some way.
Love that.
And then that way, everything grows organically.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey for Grace Camp. And I know there's a lot of needs as you're just beginning. So if you want more information on Grace Camp Canada, how to get involved, you can go to our website at 700club.ca.